One of Squarespace's recent feature releases is called Stacks, and I hated it. But mostly because I didn't understand it. And it wasn't until I started watching videos from other people who are smarter than me, who got it more quickly, that I realized the power of this new feature. And increasingly, I'm noticing that I'm not alone in hating it at first because I didn't understand it. A lot of my students in my membership and other students that I've talked to, they don't understand it either. And we all need a visual. We're visual learners because we're designers, right? So this is what I'm diving into today. I want to show you how to use Stacks and what problem it's actually solving. And it doesn't work the way that you expect it to, which is probably why you don't use it and why you might hate it if you've tried it so far. But before I dive into any of that, my name is Caitlin. I run Launch the Damn Thing. I've been a graphic designer since 2006, started my freelance business in 2015, went full-time in 2020. I've been taking a bit of a breather on the YouTube channel the past year, and I am looking forward to diving back in now that I've had some time to rest. So if you have any suggestions for future posts, leave them in the comments below, but let's get into it. So I have two websites I'm going to show you. The first one is this one, which is my demo website. And I'm showing this one not because it's pretty or attractive, just because it's a safe place for me to play around with things and mess up something while I'm teaching you how to use a tool in Squarespace because it's not live. This is not a real website. So the first thing I want to show you is the thing that Squarespace Stacks feature is solving. So let's say you design it on a smaller screen and it looks good. The problem is that when let's say you did this on your laptop, you get on your iMac or you plug in your external screen that's bigger than that laptop screen and it looks like this. What is happening with that extra space in there? Why is it doing this? What is this behavior? It's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing, but let me explain that before I show you how to fix it. So if we turn on the grid in Fluid Engine 7.1 of Squarespace, that's their newest editor. They released it 3 or so years ago now. If you press G as in good on your keyboard, it will show you the grid just like you can see now. So what's happening is that we have told Squarespace when we're laying this out that we want this title to take up a certain amount of space. So it is literally increasing the size of each of the cells that this content block is locked into, and it's going to hold that shape as we expand the size of this browser. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 cells down, and however many across. These are 24 cells across, and the midway point would be cut in half at 12. So 10 across. We're doing the same thing with the paragraph down here. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cells high, and I'll show you why I'm counting these in a minute. 5 cells high and still 10 cells across, and the button is only 6 cells across and 2 cells high. So it thinks that that is the layout that we want it to stay in, no matter the size of the screen or browser we are using to view this website. So this is the back end, obviously. And then if we preview it, it looks more like this, right? So what's happening when we expand this or see it on larger screens? It is still keeping the size of that block. But now, because Squarespace's font sizes are responsive to the size of the browser being used, it's looking at the size of the browser literally. How many pixels across is this browser? And it's keeping the size that we told it we want that heading or paragraph or button to take up. So as this browser gets bigger, it's still keeping that same shape. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 2. Those are the same numbers of cells across, or down rather, and the same number of cells across. So when we block this in, we're telling it whatever I put in this box, whatever I put in this block is okay to remain in this grouping of cells. That's what's happening. So let's expand this all the way. I have a 32-inch screen that I'm on right now. So that's a lot of extra space and it looks pretty tacky. The workaround for this without using stacks is to design the website on a bigger screen so you can see problems like this, and collapse the extra space. And we can move it up like that. And we can move all three of these down a little bit because now we have extra room. So if I save that change and then resize, you notice that happens a lot less. But did you also notice what happened when I got down to a certain size and it needed to wrap that last word into a second line? It did not add another row of cells inside whatever grouping that text block is locked to. It actually flexed the size of the cells. So they actually got taller in order to incorporate the text wrapping that had to happen there. So this is the advantage to using Fluid Engine, because it makes our content adapt and respond to whatever brand computer is being used to view our website. That means whatever size device it is, whatever brand device it is, whatever browser they are using, if the browser is taking up the entire screen or only part of it. So every device is going to have a different number of pixels, and every pixel count displays our website more fluidly, basically, which is why they call it Fluid Engine. So that's what's happening on the back end. Now, the easier way to deal with this, now that we have stacks, doesn't involve needing a 32-inch screen to start designing your website on, because not everybody has that, right? Maybe you only have your 15-inch laptop or whatever. That's totally fine. This is how we can prevent stuff like that from happening in the first place. So let's exit that so we don't save those changes. So with stacks, we can prevent this issue from happening by stacking these items together. So first, the stacks works by grouping things either horizontally or vertically. And if you have a grouping of elements that, for example, this is stacked vertically, but this group and that group are horizontal. So I'll show you both in a second. So based on your layout, you will need multiple stacks. And we'll start with this one grouping of 3 items because they're all in one line. They are all vertical in line with each other. So we'll click this one, click that one, and click this one. And then we'll click on this stack blocks option, or we can press Shift S on our keyboard. And now they are grouped together, but it changed the layout. So your first reaction is like, no, I don't want it that way. That's okay. We can fix it. So here's what's happening now. We have a spacing option between these, and because these 3 items are in the same stack, they will have the same spacing automatically between them. So if you want them to have the same space between all of the elements, they will need to be in the same stacked group. So in this case, if I didn't want the button to have the same space as between the heading and the paragraph, then I need to unstack it. So let's now disable the stack and we'll redo it with only the top 2 items together. So now these 2 have independent spacing, and then because stacks can stack on stacks, we can group the button with the first stack. So we can group the button with the first group, essentially. So let's do that. And now the button can have independent spacing under the paragraph that is different than the spacing in between the heading and the paragraph. Okay, so that's one thing we fixed. The next thing is that the button has switched by default. It for some reason does this. If it was set to fill, it often switches to fit. And I want to put it back on fill, but my God, that is huge. So let's set this to a standard pixel size of 70. That's more appropriate. And Willow's going to come visit me. She wants treats. Here's her tail. Hey, baby. Can you say hi? My goodness. Yep. Say hi. Say hi to YouTube. Okay. I'll come back when I'm done. Okay. So if the button is set to fill, then you can actually just resize the block itself, and then you can set how wide that ends up being. But note that if you do that, let's double click on the button again, go back to its settings. We are setting a hard size when we give it a pixel value. which means if the device is not 668 pixels wide or it can't support a button that big, it's going to look a little funky. I prefer to set these most of the time as percentage values rather than pixel values because that is more responsive, more mobile friendly. It's not a hard limit. Like it's not a specific size, it's a percentage of the screen, no matter what screen size is being used. So in this case, if I wanted to set that to like, let's try 25%. Nope, that's too small. Let's try 50%. That's a little better. So it will always be 50% of the size of the whole box that it's in. So let me backtrack just a little bit and explain how to access the content within this, because when you click on it, it's going to tell you that it's a stack and you can't like immediately edit anything, but that's okay because the workaround is either double clicking until you get to the editable area. So the first click selects the whole stack with all the groups inside of it. The second double click on this area clicks on just this stack, which is just the group with the 2 paragraph blocks or the heading block and the paragraph block. If I double click again, I am on just the text block with the heading in it. And if I double click on this one, I'm just on the paragraph block. So you can double click until you get to the item that's editable. So you can do it that way. That could be a lot of double clicks depending on how many stacks on stacks on stacks you have set up. So instead, you can go to the layers palette and directly select the item that you want. And then if you hide the layers palette and click edit, you can get in to make further changes. Okay. So you can use the layers palette to select anything that you want to edit within the layers palette, but you can also use the layers palette to rearrange items. So if for some reason you wanted the button to show up above the heading, you could rearrange it based on the layers palette, but we're going to put that back. And okay, so let's take a step back and look at the innards of what's happening on the stacks and what we can actually change and edit. So if we click on the pencil icon to look at the overall stack, we put everything in. That includes the first grouping of just the text and the second grouping of the whole text stack grouped with the button by itself. So first we can dictate that the direction of the stack is vertical. That was the case when we started, so we don't need to change that. We can also change the position of the elements within this stacked group. So if we want it to be center aligned, then it's going to center the text stacked group with the button. That's a little confusing in this case because the text itself is also left aligned, so it's not going to show in the way that we might expect here. But if we chose left or right, we could align the button element to the left or right. Again, that's going to be different because of the way that I set the button width here. You can also set the gap here, and that is this little pink area right here. You can either independently change it here, or you can give it a number value here. And if you hover over the icon, you can actually drag from this window too. Same thing for the padding, and the reason that the padding matters is because every stack can have a background color, a border, and a blend mode, a blur, and all these transform options. So for example, if we had this on like an overlapped image, you can't read that very well, but because it's a stack, those elements can have the same background color. And that looks better, but it's right up against the edge and we don't want that. So we'll hover over this icon here and we'll drag it until it looks better. I'm going to guess 30 pixels and 30 pixels, but let's just do 30 and 50. That seems a little bit better. And we can go down here and we can round the corners if we wanted. And now we have one grouped element with the same consistent background color. We could do this with a shape block before, but now we don't need the shape block for this, which is really cool. We can put that back over here. So every stack, however many you have, has all of these options independently of the other. So let's look at what we have inside the layers palette. We have two different stacks. The first stack only contains the heading and the paragraph. The second group contains this group and the button independently. So if we want to edit the button, then we can click on it in the layers palette, deselect the layers so we can see what we're working with. I set it to 50% of the width, and I'm going to reset that to fill instead of fit. So it will actually fill the width of the block that it's in. So it's going to always take up 50% of the width of the stack that it's in. So not 50% of the width of the button block, but 50% of the stack, the group that it's in. And I want it to remain at 70 pixels high because that is the size that I want it to have. Now, we haven't looked at mobile yet. So let's save the changes and then go over here where we see the blue dot on the mobile icon. That means that there are changes we've made on desktop that do affect mobile, so we need to double check it. So we'll switch over to mobile view. And the first thing you'll notice is that that pretty much looks correct. This is one of the amazing things about stacks. For the most part, it works really well and you don't have to make many changes on mobile. But if you do want to make separate overrides over here, you can do that. So if you click on the stack, you can see this button right here. If it's black, that means that you're overriding something or whatever change you're making does not have to affect desktop, but you can push that change to desktop if you want to. Or you can switch back to desktop and reset all overrides. So this means that basically if I change this background color to yellow for some reason and switch back to desktop, it won't be yellow on desktop. It will have only changed on mobile. And this is something we've been waiting for a long time. Now, I prefer not that color. So I'm going to switch it back to this one that feels a little bit more calm and less aggressive. And let's see what other changes we could make on this one. So if I feel like maybe the space is a little bit much on mobile because we have a narrower screen, we could maybe set the width to 20 and decrease the height of that a little bit. If we switch back to desktop, we still have the bigger spacing around the edges of that stack, whereas on mobile, it has narrower spacing. And if we look at the button, if I wanted to make that slightly narrower, I could set that to 50 pixels on mobile specifically. And if we switch back to desktop, you can see that the pixel value for the button is still 70 pixels high on desktop, but 50 pixels on mobile. So we have mobile overrides now, which is really, really useful. Okay, so that's the basics of stacks. Every stack has its own settings. Now, I've only shown you so far how to do this with items that are in the same vertical alignment. But you can actually group this item with the picture over here on the right because it's just an image block. So image block. And it's pushed over to the edge and it's taking up the full height of the section. But if I make this a little bit shorter, do 3 and 3, and I'll decrease the spacing a little bit, I could increase the size of this or increase the size of that. You can kind of see how this is working too as I resize this because it's resizing the group a whole. And as I make this whole stack larger, you can see the button block retains that 50% size that I gave it, which is really nice. Okay, so if I want to stack this one with that one, now we're going horizontally across. And what I want you to notice that stacks does not yet do very well, in my opinion, is work with overlapping items. So if I stack this one with this one, and I press the stack button, this is what it does. It actually turns it into a side-by-side rather than an overlapped item. And maybe I don't like that as much. You can change the size in between so they can touch or not touch, whatever you want to do there, but having them overlap each other is difficult. If I select so I double clicked on the image to get inside the group. Now I'm selected on the image itself, not the group as a whole, which includes everything in this section. I can choose the alignment to be centered, and I can resize the picture so it can be smaller or bigger. So it can take up whatever amount I want in this But remember, we like percentage values, not hard pixel sizes, because not every screen size is going to use or have the same amount of pixels across as every other one or the one that you're designing on. So let's say I want to have this 70% of the width. That's pretty big. So let's take that down to 50. Okay, that's closer to what we had. So let's change it to 60. And now we're going to try to offset it. And we have some offset capabilities here. X is horizontal, Y is vertical. But sometimes when you do this, you actually run into an issue with layering. So if we look at the layers palette, we can see this stacked group is above the image, which means that when I force it to offset, it looks like it's behind the stack. But you can see with the dotted line that outlines where the block is actually sitting, it's not actually where you see it, which is a little confusing and hard to deal with sometimes. So if we go over to mobile, let's look at how that looks. Yeah, not so great. So let's double click into the stack and we'll select the image. Now we're on the image, and we might need to change the overlap here. And the problem with the overlap issue is that the image block is still technically sitting right here. And even though we can, and we do, have the ability to resize the block, it's resizing the original placement. So I can't get rid of this empty space down here because Squarespace says the original image is in this dotted line box right here, not where it actually is displaying. So it can't resize this area because that's where it thinks it's sitting. So that's what makes the overlapping kind of hard to deal with. If you can do this in a layout that you don't mind that extra spacing, that's great. But if I collapse this, it gives this sort of like a weird, let me turn the grid off. It gives it sort of a weird gap in between this and where the marquee starts underneath it. And I don't love that personally, but it can work in some layouts. So that's an interesting way to do some overlapping. For the most part, I try to only use stacks with items that are not overlapping in sort of a collage kind of design. It works better with harder limits than that. So let me save that change and let's switch over now to my San Francisco template where I have a lot of stacks already in place so I can show you how they work and look like in the wild, so to speak. Okay, this is my San Francisco template, and right now it is only available for design days. So as I get the store ready to be able to sell it on its own for just anybody, right now it's only available to my clients that want me to plug their stuff into it during a design day. So for the time being, not technically available, but will be soon. Okay, so first, this is a clearly overlapped design. So let's look at how I set this up on the back end. So if we go into edit mode here, we can see one text block that goes all the way across and it's not in a group, but this is a stack. The heading, the paragraph, and the button are in a group together. And if we look at the layering, we can see text is for the heading and the paragraph. So in this case, both are in the same block, which is how I generally prefer to do that, because when you're in edit mode, you generally want to be able to edit one thing or the other without clicking into different blocks. And also this helps prevent possible overlapping, but the two, because they're all in the same block. So that's one text box with the heading and the paragraph inside it and one button. And they're grouped together so that I can control this amount of space between the paragraph and the button button size being responsive. So that is one group, and that's the only stack in this section. Everything else is in its own little world. So this is a shape block, text box, background, section picture with overlay color. And then this is an image, and there's another image right behind it. The top image is the one that has the hover effect animation, which is now available in Squarespace directly. So if I double click on this image, I can just show you animation on hover is set to show the opacity of that top image as 0. So basically it becomes completely transparent when you hover over it, when you're not in edit mode. If I scroll down, I can show you a couple more stacks. So we have this one, which is a text box on its own and it has the scaled text effect on it and the text highlight on it, then this paragraph block on its own, and then the button underneath it. So if I click on that, I can show you the layering order here. So heading, paragraph, button, and the whole contents are offset just a little bit by 15 pixels so that it touches or overlaps the image just a little. Same thing with this one, text for meet the owners, text for the fake business owners, and the button inside. And I'm overlapping or offsetting that stack by 30 pixels, just enough so that the heading is touching or overlapping the image a little bit. But everything else is kind of off to the side there. Then down here, no stacks, just animations on the hidden images that you kind of find by accident as your mouse hovers over this section. Here's another stack down here near the footer. So we have on this one, the text block and the button block are stacked together. So I can control the spacing here, but the button will retain that size. Now, if we go down to the footer, this is an interesting place where I have been using stacks a lot, especially in my templates. So in this template, you can see if I turn on the grid that all of this is grouped together, but I did it in segments. So if I check the layering here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stacks. If I undo all of these, I'll show you how this is set up and why. So this is generally what I expected or hoped that be very little effort. And I now have unique spacing that I can control between the site credits at the bottom and the reviews inside the summary block. So let's move that down here. Now we have all these elements out here, but we can't group them all together because if I do that, it looks like this or this, which is bad. We don't want that. So we'll put everything back. Okay, so first things we want to do is let's do this in columns this time. Vertically, those two together, vertically, these two together, and horizontally, these two together. So we'll do these two and stack. And now I can double click on the image and resize it within the stack. So I can say, I want this image to be a specific pixel width. I can do that here because as long as I check that the design is less than about 320 pixels, it should be okay. We can also adjust this for mobile with the override feature. So I will do that when we check mobile in a few minutes. And we can also set the spacing, the paragraph underneath it. I think I'm going to keep that at about 20 pixels. And then we're going to group these two together because they are also vertical. And I can separate those with maybe 50 pixels. And let's take that down a little bit. And then we're going to stack these two horizontally. So now I can make sure that they're separated by roughly 40 pixels, and that will matter more in mobile, not on desktop. They're clearly separated visually. Okay, so now that we have these elements separate from each other, we have this one and we have these three. Now these three can be stacked together horizontally to make sure that there's equal amounts of space in between each set in the group. So let's stack them. And it knows that this is a horizontal layout, so that's the default. And now we can hover right here to dictate the space in between so that as the screen resizes, if it gets close to where this padding area is, then it will not encroach that pink space. So let's resize and make sure we're doing the full width of the grid here. And now that we have this one that goes all the way across, we can also stack it with this one underneath it and dictate the space in between these two. So we'll stack those two together. And now if we hover right here, we can dictate there's about 60 pixels worth of space between those two sections. So if we go to mobile, now let's look at the disaster. Not too bad. We can look at the logo. We'll click on the pencil icon, and instead of setting it to fill, we'll set it to 50% on mobile. Maybe we want it 70%. Okay, that's a little better. Be a little bit narrower on mobile. Now this one, there we go. Now there's some compromises with this because of course we can't click into this and set this to center aligned text without affecting desktop as well. If we're affecting mobile only using these overrides, we're not actually editing the content inside the block. We're editing the position and the spacing in between the blocks, which is unique to desktop and mobile. But if I switch these link paragraphs to center aligned, because that changes the text itself, it should also be center aligned on desktop. So I've lost that right aligned column layout, which I actually don't mind, but just be aware that if you change something inside the actual text block or the link to a button, it can't be different on mobile versus desktop. You're only changing position, spacing, layout, like background colors, stuff like that. If I change the spacing between this grouped stack and the one underneath it, then I can also double click on this and change the spacing on mobile. And then I can reduce the size overall for the whole stack and the whole section. And now that looks a lot better on mobile. So the reason that I like doing this in stacks for the footer is because it's a lot harder for our clients to accidentally move things around so that it messes up the mobile view or messes up the desktop view because they're trying to rearrange. And if we downsize this browser window, we can watch it adapt, but keep the same layout. And we don't have those weird spacing issues anymore. So you can see as I reduce the screen width, we're not getting that weird spacing gap between that was happening in the first part of this video. That would have been happening as we downsized the screen because of the number of cells we told Squarespace to keep those items locked into. So basically the layout stays the same until it hits the mobile view. And then that's actually probably a large tablet, but it looks good on most, if not all, screen sizes. So that's an example of the footer. Now let's go into the back end and I'll show you a few more places that I'm using it without going into so great of a detail. On the about page here, this is a stack. So we'll go into edit mode. We can see this is stacked together. We'll look at the layers. That is one text block for the text, heading, and paragraph. And it's grouped together with the button. And I've set the button at a specific width so that it doesn't go all the way across in this case. And then in this one, I've stacked these two paragraphs together. So one group has both paragraphs and that lets me dictate the size between them so that it stays the same no matter the width of the screen. This one's a little bit unique, so we'll look at that too. This one, I have one text box and the image. The text box itself has a background color on it with hard corners, so no corner radius, and medium level padding. And I've set the text block alignment to center, so it stays in the center of this block. And I've stacked it together with the image on the right and reduced the spacing in between these two so that they are touching each other. This text block and the image are stacked together in a single group. And then underneath that, this button is grouped with the whole group above it. So there's one group here, another group here. Same thing for this one, except this one has a little bit of offset and you can always tell because of that dotted line. So I have this in the same layout, image on the left, text block on the right with the white background color, and I've reduced the spacing in between the items within that stack. Then I have stacked that group with the button underneath it so that the button has unique spacing in between it and the stack above it. And this stack is set to offset by -30 px, which means it will slightly overlap or underlap. It'll go underneath the stack group on the left so that it looks a little bit more like a collaged layout. So that one's a little bit unique. This one is a stack. So I have grouped in this section, the heading and the paragraph and the button are grouped together. Then that group is grouped with the text box above it. So there's two stacks here. This is the whole group. And then that one is grouped with this group. And then inside this group, it's a text box and a button. These two are not grouped or stacked together because they're overlapping. And I didn't want to have to deal with the offset values. It's just easier for me to place them individually on the Fluid Engine grid. So all of these are stacked together so that I can set this to be a specific width in between. So let's look at these sections. So this is a stack horizontally with the image on the left and then the group on the right. And inside that group, I put the text block and the button together. So in this one, I can control the space in between the item on the left and the group on the right. And inside the group on the right, I can control not the spacing in between these because these are all in the same block, text block, but I can control the space in between the text block and the button independently of this spacing right here. So this one is set to vertical stacked group and this one is set to horizontal. Same thing for all of these on the page. This one is a unique stack too. So I have two groups in this one as well. The first one is a text block with scale text turned on for each line, and then it's grouped with the button underneath it so that I can control the space in between the heading over here and the button underneath. And then that group is grouped with the accordion on the right so that I can control the space in between these two items. So the big group is connecting this grouped element here, the text and the button, with the accordion on the right, and that allows me to dictate the space in between the two items. I also have these two stacked, so the heading and the button, so that the space in between them is dictated and then it's only locked into a specific width of the screen. And the last one I'll show you is the contact page. So I have this one stacked together. And that allows me to group the text block up here, which has everything with the form button down here below that, so that I can control independently the space in between these two. And again, the benefit to stacking things together is that now if you need to move these around and rearrange them, like let's say you wanted to put the image, I don't know, over here for some reason, even though that makes it kind of hard to read. If you wanted to do that, it'd be easier because now you can just grab the stack and kind of jump it around, as opposed to before we were unable to do that as easily because we had to select all of the items. Like there was no way to group them together and then just move them together as a group without selecting them individually and then moving them together while they were all still selected. Now that's no longer the case. One thing I want you to be aware of as you're using stacks is that if you do what I did just a second ago, where I moved it and see where the insert marker is showing up, there's a blue line that shows up above the heading. That's telling me that I'm actually about to place this image inside the grouped stack. So if I let go, it's going to show up right here. And then you're going to be like, why does it look like that? I don't understand. It's because there wasn't anything up there before. We just need to tell it what the space is that image can take up now. So it could work if you still want to keep it there, but if you don't, just go back and undo. And make sure that when you place it, you're not actually seeing that insert marker. So when I let go that time, let me do that one more time so I can show you. If I place this right now, if I let go, it's going to insert the image right between the last item in the paragraph and the button right below it. But if I move my cursor out of this stacked area, then it won't place it in the stack. So if I move my cursor over here outside of it, notice that it didn't gray out. So if it turns grayed out or lighter, then that's indicating, hey, you might actually be placing this inside a group. But if it's darker and you don't see that blue insert line in addition to the highlighted block that you're moving around, it's not going to put it inside the stack. So if I move it here, it's going to place it inside. If I move it and see that blue horizontal line, that's telling me where it's going to go. So if you don't want it there, you can just make sure that you're not seeing that blue insert marker wherever it is that you're dragging that item. So it is helpful. You can drag them into groups directly, but sometimes that can happen by accident too. So I could actually go on about this topic in much more detail, but I'll save you. If you have additional questions about how to use Stack, just leave them in the comments below. And if I get enough of them, I could do another video actually troubleshooting those kinds of issues in a future video. But hope this was helpful. If you find that you don't actually want to deal with this, or you still don't get it and you need some live support type help, and you're also a web designer, I have a free community lovingly called Freeloaders, which you can join, where you can ask the group questions. You can show off your work. You can ask about Squarespace updates. It's a really fun space. There's a few hundred people in there. And if you want more hands-on support, you can join Insiders, which is the exclusive space within the community where you have direct access to me. I do monthly office hours calls, and those last, I kid you not, roughly 3 hours on average, but we only do them once a month. So it's a great space for you to pre-submit your questions, get hands-on advice or eyes on your stuff. And I really love hanging out in there. So if you look at my Instagram or my LinkedIn or my Facebook profiles, etc., TikTok, whatever, and you don't see me active in there, it's because I'm always active in my own community instead. So if you want more Caitlin, make sure you go and join the club in one way or the other. Group support for freeloaders or my support in Insiders. Go to launchthedamnthing.com/club, and I hope to see you inside. That's all I have for you in this one. I will see you in the next one. Bye.